everybody, welcome to another Dannphan's advice video. Haven't done one of these in a while. And today we're talking about a topic that you would probably never expect to get advice from me for, and that is harems. Yes, the many anime harems that I've watched to much displeasure. I've always been pretty openly critical of harems for a few different reasons, and people usually just take that criticism as, oh, Dannphan just does not like harems at all. To some extent, maybe that's true, but I have seen harems that I think were pretty good. I have seen harems done well, in my opinion. So I thought maybe that would be a funny thing to do in Dannphan's advice video on, just briefly talking about the idea of harems, what they're trying to do with these types of anime shows, why there's so many of them, and my own opinions on how you can do a harem right. You probably already know this, but of course, the opinions are not the important part of the Dannphan's advice videos. It's me explaining why I have these opinions that are the important part that writers should be listening to better understand the audience that they may be going for, or the audience that's going to be most critical of them. And me being a very critical person of harems, I feel like you'll find this fairly insightful. So first, let's talk about what is a harem and why do they gain traction. The harem genre is defined as when there is a main character, either male or female, who has more than 2 love interests who they must choose from. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 7. A lot of people think that this works because it plays to that fantasy, being someone who a lot of people want to be with and having the ability to choose amongst people who love you. Choose who is worthy of your love, you know. Which is definitely a fantasy and not one that's restricted to either gender. Both genders kind of have that fantasy of being so amazing that everyone loves and wants to be with them. So people who write harems are playing off of that fantasy, but they're also playing off of drama and conflict, because a lot of people who are reading harems, they're waiting for a conclusion. They see all the drama, all the mix-ups, all the craziness going down, and they're wondering, how could they possibly conclude this? They're waiting for that satisfying ending, especially with the mystery and the hook being that the main character has to choose one of these people. And you're not really quite sure which one they're going to choose. As you can imagine, throughout most harems, they try to make it very ambiguous which option is going to be the option that the main character goes with. So a lot of people will hang in there and keep buying the next volume, the next volume, the next volume, just hoping to get a conclusion eventually, or at least get clues to where this series would be heading. Now, the third thing that people who write harems are playing off of is, of course, shipping. People who choose teams to root for, which is also something that I guess love triangles can also play with. Obviously, there was the Team Jacob and Team Edward thing going on. People who root for one character getting the girl because they personally think that character is the more attractive one, be it because of personality or other reasons. Now, shipping can obviously get toxic in fandoms, which is why I, for the most part, try to stay away from shippers. But I will say the thing that shipping adds to a series is that it makes the fans more passionate, albeit that passion can turn into raging hate online, but it keeps your series alive, it keeps people talking about it and anticipating the next volume, which will keep them buying the next volume, and yada yada yada. So with all of these things in mind, it makes for a very sellable series that people can easily get hooked on, get addicted to, up until, of course, it eventually has to end. Which is why a lot of people like doing harems. Now, what are the downfalls of harems? Well, there's quite a few. The biggest downfall, I think, though, is the inability to conclude. There are a lot of harems out there that simply have no conclusion because it was too much pressure on the author to actually have the main character pick one of the harem choices. And part of the reason why there's so much pressure on this author with what choice their character picks It's also, has to do with the shippers. It has to do with them trying to make it ambiguous and keeping the mystery alive so people will keep on buying volumes. They're worried if they finally conclude it, then there won't be anything left. There's no reason to continue the series, which, is usually how harems go. As soon as they make up their mind what character they want the main character to be with, the series usually ends. And of course, with the shippers in mind, if you don't choose the right option for the main character to end up with, they get pretty upset and they're not satisfied with your ending, which can leave a pretty bitter taste in their mouth when the series finally does conclude. Because of this, I see a lot of harems get a lot of attention when they're first starting out, and then when they end, they fall off the face of the earth because people didn't like the ending and now they don't like the entire series. And I do agree that an ending can ruin an entire series. I've had it happen to me so many times. When I start a manga series, I really enjoy the beginning, but the ending ruins it because the author, I guess, didn't know what to do with the ending, and they make horrible bad choices. Another pitfall that I see a lot of harems falling into is their main characters not being likable or being too aloof, not having many opinions. As is expected, when you have a harem and the main character has to pick between all these different love interests, it kind of makes them look like a whore if they can't pick, if they have no opinions on who they like romantically. It kind of makes their choice feel less valid if they spend all this time trying to pick one. It kind of makes it feel like, oh, well, I guess they must not really love this person that much if it took them so long to pick them. Even more so if the main character is bland, if they really are just aloof, just meant to be a figurehead for the reader themselves to project themselves onto and play with the fantasy idea, then it really doesn't make too much sense for all these different characters to like the main character in the first place if they're so bland, if they have no opinions, if they have no real personality. It kind of makes you scratch your head and wonder what exactly is what's so special about them. Oftentimes I find the love interests to be way more interesting than the actual main character who they love. And that can be kind of frustrating, I gotta say. So some of you might hear some of these pitfalls and you're wondering, well, Dannphan, you said that you have come across harems that you've liked and you think have been done well. Can you give us an example? Because it kind of just sounds like you don't like the format of harems themselves. It's true that a lot of harems go by this same exact formula of being ambiguous, having an aloof main character, having unsatisfying conclusions, but I have seen harems that go a different direction. Now, one harem that I will mention that some of you might not even see as a valid example of a harem, it was actually a visual novel that I read more so recently this year called Find Love or Die Trying. Now, a lot of these dating sims visual novels will give you the option of deciding who the main character ends up with at the end, but this one, for me at least, felt like it had a true ending, like the ideal person who you should pick at the end. But to briefly go over this plot and why I feel like it did the harem correctly, the main character finds himself trapped on an island where he's the star of a dating show that involves him going on dates with all these different women and eventually choosing the one that he wants to marry. However, the catch is if he does not choose a woman to marry, he'll be killed. Now, it's not much of a plot twist per se, but I will reveal some more plot stuff besides that. So if you wanted to read it yourself, you might want to stop the video at this point. But even though he can't remember it, he has actually played this dating game multiple times because every time he picks a girl, they wipe his memory and make it so that he has to date a new girl. And the idea of doing this is to get a different outcome of him falling in love with different girls, so they have different versions of the same episode to run with. So in a way, they're fucking with this guy's head to make it so that he falls in love with all of the girls, and so they have all of the different endings for him falling in love with each girl. And then they just get to choose which one of these endings responds better with the audience and then run that one. Now, because of how they set it up, it makes sense for him to fall in love with all of these girls without necessarily being a whore and being, you know, a dirty cheater scumbag. Even more so, it makes the choice at the end when he regains his memories a lot more complicated, because he has all these different memories of falling in love with each girl, and he's not exactly sure how he feels all of a sudden. The ending that I consider the true ending is that he doesn't really end up with any of the girls that he went on the dates when he was a part of this dating show, but rather instead he ends up with the producer, who was his original girlfriend before the show even started, who unfortunately had to watch him dating all of these other girls and not be able to say anything. The idea of this being that because the romances on the island were forced, they're less valid than a romance that happened naturally. Of course, granted, it is a dating sim, so you can pick whatever ending you want, so I guess it doesn't really count. But they do a good job at building chemistry with each and every one of these women that he goes on the dates with an air of mystery of who is he actually going to end up with. But I felt it to be a lot more reasonable in that regard, because there's actually a reason why he's not sure who to end up with. There's a reason why he's in love with all the women at the same time, but I don't want it to seem like I'm saying the plot needs to be better for a harem to work necessarily. I just think that people need to be more thoughtful on how does one main character get put in this situation. What's so special about them that attracts all of these different characters? How do they fall in love with all of these different characters at once? And I do think that an author should, if they're doing a harem, they should have it in mind which of the characters they want the main character to end up with. I know some people might argue that that's a bad idea. They should just, you know, listen to the audience and do whatever the audience wants. But I do think that there should be an already made up choice from the start of the harem to the end, because this gives you the ability to plan ahead of time and further convince the audience that yes, this is obviously the choice he should make. I understand wanting to keep it a mystery and making it seem like they could fall in love with either of these characters and it would be fine, but I do think chemistry between the characters is probably the most important thing to convince an audience that they should be together. So you should be showcasing that the two characters who actually end up together have that romantic chemistry and do actually deserve to be with each other. And if you do that much, I think that the audience will be satisfied. Even if it's not their ship per se, at the very least they'll understand why those characters end up together. In a lot of love triangles, I see it where halfway through the series, the author decides which one they want the main character to be with, and then they'll like basically dedicate the entire last half of the series to just show those two characters being, you know, cute with each other so that they can sell the audience on the idea of these two are the ones who are going to end up together, not that other option. Forget about that other option. We're sticking with these two. And that is certainly a way to go about it, but I feel like it should be decided from the beginning. But you always want to treat the actual option as special in some way. And I've often joked about it in harems that the option that they usually end up with is the odd one out. I think that harems have become a lot more ambiguous lately, where you can't actually tell which one is the odd one out. Some people joke about how harems, they always choose the most bland option, which is another thing that tends to happen. And they get all pissy, like, why didn't you choose the tsundere person? They were the obvious option. Harems are difficult. I'm not gonna lie, I'm just being straight with you. They're difficult to write. I think that it is possible to write a good harem, but there's a lot of things that you have to consider when you go about it. So that's some of my advice when it comes to approaching a harem. If you have your own opinions or your own advice that you'd like to give, please leave them in the comments. And if you have more examples that you'd like to put out there of harems that have been done right in your opinion, leave those in the comments. I'd love to see what other shows or manga series have done harems correctly. Like the video if you did enjoy. Thank you for listening. Hopefully I have given you some insight into my head. If you'd like to see more videos from me, obviously you gotta subscribe. Until then, I'll see you next time, guys.
Program restart.